Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Epic History TV. Russia's first revolutionaries, the Decembrists. Okay. Great channel. Amazing. One of my favorites. Let's do it.
1815. At the Battle of Waterloo, French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte suffers his final defeat, and 2 decades of war in Europe come to an end.
Okay, sorry. Yep.
Powers, led by war in Europe, come to an end. The victorious powers, led by Austria, Britain, Prussia, and Russia, meet at Vienna to decide the fate of Europe. The frontiers of nations and empires are redrawn, while Emperor Alexander of Russia adds King of Poland to his list of titles. He also oversees creation of a holy alliance to ensure that no more revolutions threaten Europe's established order. The Russian Empire, after many great sacrifices in the wars against Napoleon, emerges more powerful than ever. But not everyone in Russia is pleased with the new state of affairs. A group of young army officers dream of a different future for Russia. A new form of government, radical reforms, even a Russia without a Tsar.
Guys, I've always wondered, if, and maybe you guys answered this before and I didn't see it, but, if Russia prior to the Russian Revolution was a sort of Western Europe, because Tsar the last Tsar was related to King George V, right? And so I'm wondering if it was a relationship between like an ethnic group of Russians that looked like it was under the control of a foreign king, or was he always seen as a fellow Russian and a Russian ruling Russians, or was it Westerners ruling, you know what I mean? Like, what did they see it that way? Phones away.
This video is sponsored by NordVPN. These days, more and more
Make sure to use the /EpicHistoryTV for the NordVPN, guys.
people are using a VPN for a more secure and enjoyable internet experience. A VPN encrypts your internet traffic and hides your location, protecting you from unwanted surveillance, data theft, and malware attacks. It also opens up access to sites and services that may be blocked in your location. NordVPN gives you all this and more, with simple one-click or automatic connection on up to 6 devices on all major platforms. They have thousands of servers in 60 countries, ensuring you can connect anonymously and take advantage of the best content and offers from around the globe. If you're worried all this might slow down your connection, speed tests confirm that NordVPN is currently the fastest VPN available.
I never really had
We have a brilliant deal for Epic History TV viewers, a 61% discount if you sign up using nordvpn.com/epichistorytv, or just click the link in the video description. Plus, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee for peace of mind. Thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring this video.
Thanks, Nord. Let's do it.
In 1812, Napoleon had invaded Russia with the largest army Europe had ever seen. It was a defining moment in his reign, but he underestimated Russian resolve. 4 months later, the remnants of his army began its infamous retreat from Moscow. The Russian army and its coalition allies then drove Napoleon's forces back across Europe, fighting giant battles in Germany, and finally arriving in the streets of Paris itself. Napoleon's abdication was a moment of triumph for Emperor Alexander and for Russia. For many young Russian officers, it was also an eye-opening experience. Imperial Russia was an autocracy, ruled by an emperor with no checks upon his power. There was no political opposition or constitution. There was no freedom of speech or right to trial. Approximately 80% of Russians were serfs, peasants with no rights, freedom, or hope of betterment.
80%.
Their status passed down to their children. The inefficiency, not to mention injustice, of such a system was increasingly apparent even to many Russian aristocrats. In Europe, serving as officers in the Russian army, they'd visited countries where serfdom had been swept aside by war and revolution, and where monarchs had granted constitutions that limited their power, protected freedoms, and acknowledged the rule of law. Many were inspired and began to dream of similar reforms in Russia. But few placed faith in Emperor Alexander.
So, the start of the thought process behind the eventual revolution 100 years later started because of viewing Western European countries after the defeat of Napoleon. That's so cool.
To aid their cause.
I missed that last part. I got that.
But few placed faith in Emperor Alexander to aid their cause.
You always want to teach me, but I am the emperor, and I desire this and nothing else.
On the night of the 11th of March, 1801, Alexander's father, Emperor Paul, was strangled to death by a group of disaffected army officers. Alexander succeeded to the throne, aged just 23. The ineffectiveness and chaos of his father's rule had appalled him. In 1797, he'd written to his tutor, "To speak plainly, the well-being of the state is not at all considered in the administration of affairs. There is only absolute power, which does everything wrong and at cross purposes. The choice of officials is entirely a matter of favoritism. Merit counts for nothing. The farmer is plagued, commerce is hindered, personal liberty and well-being are reduced to nothing. There you have the picture of Russia. Judge how my heart must suffer." The young Alexander displayed a great enthusiasm for reform, an encouraging sign to Russian aristocrats who wished to see a more modern Russian state. In 1803, he passed a decree that gave landowners the right to free their serfs. Many hoped it was a first step towards the abolition of serfdom.
It allowed them to release the serfs? They weren't even allowed to before? That's confusing. That doesn't really seem like a step at all.
Many hoped it was a first step towards the abolition of serfdom. In 1808, the brilliant and liberal-minded Mikhail Speransky became Alexander's chief advisor. He created a new Council of State to advise the emperor, and even began working on a Russian constitution. But in 1812, Alexander's appetite for reform ended abruptly. First, an anti-reform faction, led by the emperor's sister, Grand Duchess Ekaterina Pavlovna, engineered Speransky's dismissal. Then, Napoleon invaded Russia. In this moment of supreme crisis, Alexander was seized by religious fervor, a sense of personal mission and national destiny. The burning of Moscow, he declared, had illuminated his soul. Liberal reforms, he could now see, were only the road to anarchy and chaos. They were an intolerable risk to Russia's holy institutions. In 1815, any officers returning from Europe harboring hopes of reform were to be severely disappointed. Alexander added insult to injury by granting a liberal constitution, not to Russia.
This is weird. This is the closest that I've ever felt awkward in a history video. You know? It's like what? How do you? So the fact that there was so much war and everything in Europe meant that there were more revolutions, and so went away from serfdom more. And then Russia is just kind of this large, pretty powerful country way off to the east that is just sort of centuries in the past, and now the officers are coming back from this place only to see stuff worse off. It's like, oh god.
But to his new kingdom, Poland, not one, it turned out, he planned to honor. 3 years later, when Alexander raised the possibility of a Russian constitution based on this Polish experiment, it proved an empty promise. Idealistic young officers, more alienated than ever, decided that if the emperor would not take up their cause, they must act themselves. They began to organize secret societies and to plan a revolution.
Guys, I wonder how this connects to the especially now more than ever, as I'm learning how to learn more. I hope that makes sense, learning how to learn. I kind of, when I get into a subject that I'm sort of new in, not necessarily new in the Napoleonic Wars, I've been learning a lot about it, but the Russian part after the Napoleonic Wars is, I know like the Crimean War is a few decades later. Russia's heavily involved in that, and so this is got to tie into the Crimean War somehow, and I'm excited to see how it does. We do not fear death on the battlefield, but we are afraid to speak out in favor of justice. Yeah, that's strange, yes.
Many Russian military officers already belonged to a secret society. Freemasonry had been imported from Europe in the 18th century and was popular among army officers. But in 1816, officers from Russia's prestigious Guards regiments, based in St. Petersburg, formed a new secret society, the Union of Salvation. 4 of its founding members would play a leading role in a revolutionary movement that became known as the Decembrists. Nikita Muravyov, a captain in the Guards Division staff, aged 31 at the time of the Decembrists' revolt. He would draft one of their major plans for constitutional reform. Lieutenant Colonel Sergei Muravyov-Apostol, aged 30 at the time of the revolt. He would lead the Decembrist uprising in Ukraine. Colonel Prince Sergei Trubetskoy, aged 36 at the time of the revolt. A war hero from one of Russia's most distinguished families, Trubetskoy would be chosen to lead the Decembrist coup in St. Petersburg. And Colonel Pavel Pestel of the Vyatka Infantry Regiment, aged 33 at the time of the revolt. Also a decorated war hero, badly wounded at Borodino. He was a brilliant, if uncompromising officer, and one of the most active and radical members of the Union. He would argue for the Emperor's death and creation of a Russian Republic. The Union of Salvation soon merged with another secret society, the Order of Russian Knights, to form the Union of Prosperity, with more than 200 members. Its charter, known as the Green Book, set out how the Union was to be organized. It also spelled out its commitment to educating the public about enlightenment.
Convinced that good morality is a firm bulwark of the prosperity and prowess of the people, and that, with all the cares of the government about it, it will hardly achieve its goal if those governed on their part do not contribute to it in these beneficent intentions. The Union of Prosperity makes it a sacred duty to spread among compatriots the true rules of morality and enlightenment to help the government raise Russia to the level of greatness and prosperity to which it is destined by its creator. Section 1, distribution of the rules of morality. Section 2, education of youth, dissemination of knowledge.
Enlightenment ideals of virtuous, moral citizenship. This, it was hoped, would generate wider support for reform among Russia's elite. Only a trusted inner circle was privy to the Union's more radical, long-term goals of securing a constitution and ending serfdom.
Why are the Russian people and Russian army unhappy? Because the Tsars have stolen their freedom. Sergei Muravyev, Apostle of the Orthodox Catechism. Arakchiev.
The leaders of the Union of Prosperity were...
What did that say? The strongmen.
The leaders of the Union of Prosperity were wise to be wary. Alexander had tightened censorship laws, while allies kept him informed about Russia's supposedly secret societies. For the moment, he tolerated them, telling one courtier, "You who have served me since the beginning of my reign know that I have shared and encouraged all these dreams and delusions. It is not for me to be strict." His new closest advisor, General Alexei Arakcheyev, felt no such restraint. Arakcheyev had masterminded the organization of Russia.
Just before I forget, do you know it would be a really cool alternate history video? And maybe someone has made it already, but what if Napoleon was successful in conquering mainland Europe, even if he didn't eventually conquer the UK? Like, what if he was successful in taking over Moscow and ruled Moscow to Paris? I don't know if maybe they would have been defeated eventually anyway, or if they would have been greeted as like liberators from, like the serfs might have seen them as liberators from from their owners or whatnot. So that would be interesting.
Russian artillery during the Napoleonic Wars, and was famed for ruthless efficiency, a violent temper, and absolute loyalty to the emperor. He loathed almost anything to do with Western Europe. "You don't get things done by talking softly in French," he once remarked. Arakcheyev was put in charge of the emperor's latest idea, the so-called military settlements. The plan was to cut the cost of Russia's huge army by having soldiers and serfs live side by side in new villages organized like military camps, with strict discipline. It was a harsh policy, even by the standards of Russian autocracy, and led to misery, riots, and rising resentment against the regime. Arakcheyev also enforced strict new standards of discipline and conduct in the army.
Hold on, wait. No. Huh?
And serfs. The plan was to cut the cost.
I'm gonna go back forward. You can go back to you can go forward if you want.
Military settlement was put softly in French, he once remarked.
Speak loudly in Russian.
Arakcheyev was put in charge of the emperor's latest idea, the so-called military settlements. The plan was to cut the cost of Russia's huge army by having soldiers and serfs live side by side in new villages organized like military camps, with strict discipline. It was a harsh policy, even by the standards of Russian autocracy, and led to misery, riots, and rising resentment against the regime.
Wow, I'm glad I rewinded. I did not catch that.
Arakcheyev also enforced strict new standards of discipline and conduct in the army. The soldiers who had defeated Napoleon were now subjected to endless parades and inspections. Small infractions were brutally punished. Officers who spoke out on behalf of their men were dismissed. In 1820, a protest by the Semyonovsky Life Guard Regiment, one of the army's senior...
It's so awkward. It's awkward. Awkward is the word. I've never used that word when learning about history, but it's awkward. It's like, okay, you're gonna live over... Like, it's like, okay, you can't speak out, and even if you're officers, you can't speak out on behalf of your men. It's just breeding resentment and then trying to codify it with more resentment. It just it doesn't make any sense, and it's just okay.
Officers who spoke out on behalf of their men were dismissed.
You're dismissed. Oh, okay.
In 1820, a protest by the Semyonovsky Life Guard Regiment, one of the army's senior units, led to even more savage punishments. To the Decembrist leaders, it proved that even elite regiments had fallen out of love with the regime. They themselves would be acting in a strong Russian tradition of palace coups led by army officers to...
you hear about this, the assassination, obviously, like the movie Anastasia, you hear about the assassination of the czars, and you kind of like feel bad for, or it's like, oh my God, those barbaric people, like getting those and then killing them all. And after hearing this stuff so far, I'm like, maybe it was a good thing that they actually, and then communism happened. Oh God. But I mean, like, Jesus, okay. Yeah. This is a perfect course in how to be hated by your people. Just do everything he's doing.
Secure dynastic and political change. The crucial task was to be ready when the moment came.
The Russian people, free and independent, is not and cannot be the property of any person or any family. Draft Constitution of Nikita Muravyov, the Northern Society.
By 1821, the number of new members joining the Union of Prosperity made its founders suspicious of infiltration and discovery. So they dissolved the Union.
I don't want to hear it.
Joining. By 1821, the number of new members joining the Union of Prosperity made its founders suspicious of infiltration and discovery.
Okay. All right.
So they dissolved the Union. Its most trusted and committed members formed two new groups, each with around 20 to 30 members. The Northern Society was based in the Russian capital, St. Petersburg, and was initially the more moderate organization. The more radical Southern Society was based in Tulchin, Ukraine, where several Decembrist officers were stationed with their regiments. Both societies spent
if they were trying to influence the society, that was so stupid. Why would they send a flood of people in? Just send like one or two guys.
Time holding secret meetings at the apartments of their members. They would stay up late into the night discussing political ideas, reading aloud from banned literature, drafting manifestos and resolutions. The Northern Society adopted a draft constitution by Nikita Muravyov as its aims. His moderate document would make Russia a constitutional monarchy, but was otherwise heavily influenced by the US Constitution of 1787. He too called for a division of power between executive, legislature, and judiciary, with each imposing checks and balances on the others. The executive was the emperor, supreme official of the Russian government, who would command the armed forces, lead foreign policy, and had the power to veto legislation. The legislature, a people's Vyeche, or assembly, composed of a Supreme Duma, or Senate, and a House of Representatives. Serfdom would be abolished, and there would be equality before the law. The right to vote would be restricted to those who owned a certain amount of property, thus excluding the very poorest Russians. The Russian Empire was also to become a federal...
I mean, the same thing was done in the US, I think.
State of...
like you had to be property owner?
Was also to become a federal state of...
Wait a second, did he say...
those who owned a certain amount of property.
Oh, a certain amount.
Thus excluding the very poorest Russians. The Russian Empire was also to become a federal state of 15 regions, each with their own executives and assemblies. However, in 1823, a new member would take the Northern Society in a much more radical direction. 27-year-old Kondraty Rylyev was another war veteran and a famous poet. He was passionate, eloquent, and devoted to the cause of revolution. He was known for his satire of the hated General Arakchev, secretly circulating amongst Russian liberals. All fear, tyrant, for evil and treachery, thou shalt be condemned by thy posterity. Rylyev despised monarchy in all its forms. There are no good governments in the world except in America, he declared. He proved a highly influential figure, and soon a radical wing of the Northern Society formed around him, taking up his argument for a republican revolution. A friend described a meeting at his apartment around this time.
I gotta say, I don't like talking about American history that much, but It does kind of show me how America is, you know, it's kind of rare for a part of a larger empire breaking away and starting this successful, you know, own government. And I'm finding that's not a common thing.
There must have been more than described a meeting at his apartment around this time. There must have been more than a dozen people in the room, but at first I could not distinguish anything because of the dense blue haze of pipe and cigar smoke. They were sprawling on sofas and on the deep windowsills. Young Alexander Odojevsky and Bestujev sat cross-legged, Turkish fashion, on a Persian carpet. An intense youth with a pale complexion and prominent forehead lifts a glass. Death to the Tsar! The toast is received with emotion. Ryliev's jet-black eyes light up with an inner flame. They sing to the death of the Tsar. The rhythmic chant flows through the open windows for all to hear.
Bit risky. The government belongs to the people and was established for the good of the people. The people do not exist for the good of the government. Pavel Pestel, Russian Truth.
The leading figure of the Southern Society, based in Ukraine, was Colonel Pavel Pestel. He provided the group with its own constitution, Russkaya Pravda, Russian Truth. This lengthy, unfinished treatise was much more radical than Muravyov's.
The preserved state charter of the great Russian people, serving as a covenant for the improvement of the state system of Russia and containing the truth, order for the people, and provisional supreme council, chapter 1 of the territorial extent of the state. Blah, blah, blah.
Constitution. There was no place for an emperor in Pestel's new Russia. The former supreme power has already sufficiently proved its hostile feelings towards the Russian people. The current order will cease to exist. Pestel called for a revolution spearheaded by a provisional supreme council that would implement gradual but sweeping change. The two main needs for Russia are clear: a complete reorganization of the state order and structure, and the publication of a completely new code of laws, while preserving everything that is useful and destroying everything that is harmful. Serfdom would be abolished, land redistributed to the peasants, class privileges abolished, and the vote given to all Russian male citizens. The northern and southern societies remained in close contact, despite major differences of opinion between and within both societies. There was still much that bound them. All desired the abolition of serfdom and conscription, the end of autocratic government, the establishment of new rights and freedoms for the Russian people. What's more, they felt themselves to be in step with a spirit of the age, as revolutions and conspiracies spread across Europe in the name of liberty. Such events reaffirmed their conviction that change in Russia must come from direct action, a coup d'etat, or revolution.
On the 14th, I will be emperor or dead. Grand Duke Nicholas, 12th December 1825.
In 1825, Pavel Pestel learned that the following spring, Emperor Alexander and his entourage would travel to Ukraine to inspect troops of the Second Army. Pestel formed a plan to assassinate the emperor and launch a coup to establish a Russian republic. The date was set, the 12th of March, 1826. After urgent communications with the Northern Society, Ryliev's faction agreed to launch a simultaneous uprising in the capital, St. Petersburg. But in December, unexpected news threw all their plans into disarray. That winter, Emperor Alexander visited southern Russia, where it was hoped the climate would improve his wife's frail health. Instead, Alexander himself became seriously ill. He died at Taganrog, aged 47.
No.
Typhus was the most likely cause.
What? There's only... Okay.
Alexander's sudden death was a shock to all Russia. The Decembrists had agreed that the best time to force political change was at the succession of a new Tsar. Now was their moment. But no one was quite sure who the new Tsar was. Alexander had died without legitimate offspring. By the law of succession, he should have been succeeded by the eldest of his younger brothers, Grand Duke Constantine. But Constantine was terrified at the prospect of becoming emperor. "I will be strangled, just as my father was strangled," he would say when the subject came up. So 3 years before his death, Alexander signed a secret document making his younger brother, Grand Duke Nicholas, his heir. But when Alexander suddenly died, the new order of succession was still secret, known only to a few members of the imperial family. All of Russia assumed Constantine was their new emperor. Patriarchs, politicians, and troops swore new oaths of loyalty. Even Grand Duke Nicholas swore an oath, judging it better to observe the usual customs until Alexander's secret document could be made public. But Constantine, based in Warsaw in his role as commander-in-chief of the Polish army, had no intention of taking the throne. Nicholas urged his brother to come to St. Petersburg and publicly renounce the throne to end the confusion. Constantine refused. "I cannot accept your request to come to St. Petersburg and warn you that I shall move even further away unless everything is settled in accordance with the will of our late sovereign." Meanwhile, the Decembrists
It's like a hot potato. I don't want it.
in St. Petersburg were meeting daily. Meanwhile, the Decembrists in St. Petersburg were meeting daily. They had been caught off guard by Alexander's death, but the chaos of the interregnum provides perfect cover for them. They recruit more officers to their cause, sound out the rank and file, work out who can be relied on and who cannot. Ryleyev works without pause. All are fired with a wild enthusiasm. That December, rumors, confusion, and fake news swirl around the Russian capital. Grand Duke Nicholas knows he is not popular with the troops. They regard him as another martinet, overly fond of inspections and parades. Now he is told that unknown army officers are actively conspiring against him. He decides to act first. In the early hours of the 14th of December, 1825, Nicholas declares himself Emperor of Russia. He will require an oath of loyalty that morning from all officials and troops in St. Petersburg. The Decembrists know that if the troops swear that oath, their cause is lost.
Really?
There might not be another opportunity like this in decades.
Why exactly is it lost? I mean, okay, they swore an oath of loyalty, so that's... So it was that big of a deal? It's like, no, I swore, I cannot...
Is lost. There might not be another opportunity like this in decades. The 14th of December becomes do or die for the revolutionaries. And before the day is out, the streets of the Russian capital will run with blood.
No!
Thank you to all the Epic History TV Patreon supporters.
You had to leave it there, Epic History. Well, he knows how to make a good cliffhanger. Really cool. So, I'm wondering, so the oath of loyalty is a big deal, obviously. I'm wondering, I'm thinking, okay, he died from the sickness or whatever. Well, they had everything planned. Why not, like, right after they heard of the death, start the overthrow in St. Petersburg? I'm guessing, to answer my own question, I'm guessing it was because... like, an assassination would be a clear message that this is happening, and if there wasn't an assassination and he died of natural causes and then they started the thing on St. Petersburg, then it would be much more confusing. Like, what the hell exactly is this? I'm guessing that's the reason. Cool video, awesome. Really great. I can't wait for the next episode. See you guys next time. Bye.